Pack your bags, Mom. The nursing home van arrives at 9 tomorrow morning. Those words shattered my world more than the Parkinson's diagnosis ever could. My own son, standing in the doorway of the home I'd lived in for 37 years, holding eviction papers like they were a birthday gift. What Michael didn't know, as he smugly calculated my assets and planned my departure, was that just 3 days earlier, I'd won $2.3 million in the state lottery. The ticket was hidden in my jewelry box, unclaimed, unannounced. Sometimes the cruelest betrayals reveal the truest character of those we love most. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, forgotten by those you sacrificed everything for, this story is for you. It's not just about revenge, it's about discovering your worth when everyone else has decided you're worthless. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The tremor in my left hand started 3 months before everything fell apart. At first, I dismissed it as stress. After all, turning 72 while living alone in suburban Cleveland wasn't exactly peaceful. The house on Maple Street had been our family sanctuary for decades, where I'd raised Michael and his sister Sarah, where my late husband Frank had built the back deck with his own hands, where grandchildren had taken their first steps across. Hardwood floors that creaked with memory. Dr. Patricia Williams delivered the diagnosis on a Tuesday morning in October. Parkinson's disease, early stage, manageable with medication and lifestyle adjustments. Her words felt clinical, detached, as if she were discussing someone else's future entirely. "You'll need support," she explained, adjusting her wire-rimmed glasses. Family involvement is crucial for managing this condition effectively. The progression varies, but early intervention and a strong support system make all the difference. I nodded, already mentally preparing the conversation I'd need to have with Michael. My son worked as a financial advisor downtown, married to Jennifer, a sharp-tongued woman who'd never quite warmed to me despite 15 years of trying. They lived in an upscale development 20 minutes away with their twin boys, Connor and Blake, now 14 and more interested in video games than visiting their grandmother. The lottery ticket sat forgotten in my purse during that appointment. I'd bought it 3 days earlier at Murphy's Corner store, same as I had every week for the past 5 years since Frank died. $5 for a chance at something different, something hopeful. The clerk, young Jimmy with the crooked smile, had wished me luck as always. I'd smiled back, never expecting that casual Tuesday purchase would change everything. That evening, I called Michael to share the diagnosis. His reaction was immediate and predictable. "How bad is it?" His voice carried the weight of inconvenience, rather than concern. "Dr. Williams says it's early stage. With proper care and medication, I can maintain my independence for years." Independence. He repeated the word like it tasted bitter. "Mom, let's be realistic. You're 72, living alone in a 3-bedroom house that's falling apart. Now, you have a degenerative disease. This isn't about independence anymore." I sat in Frank's old recliner, looking around the living room we'd decorated together 40 years ago. The wallpaper was dated, sure, and the carpet showed its age, but falling apart seemed harsh. "I'm managing fine, Michael. The diagnosis changes. Very little right now. Right now, sure. But what about next month? Next year? Jennifer and I have been discussing this for months anyway. The house is too much for you." This revelation stung. They'd been discussing my living situation without including me in the conversation. How long had I been a problem to be solved, rather than a mother to be cared for? "You've been discussing my house without me?" "We've been concerned about you, Mom. Don't make this about betrayal when it's about practicality." But it felt like betrayal. Every conversation we'd had over the past year suddenly took on new meaning. The casual questions about my finances, the suggestions about downsizing, Jennifer's comments about the neighborhood changing. They hadn't been making small talk. They'd been conducting reconnaissance. The next morning, I decided to check my Lottery numbers. I'd forgotten entirely about the ticket until I was organizing my purse, looking for the small notebook where I kept track of my medications. The ticket fell onto my kitchen table, the numbers familiar yet unremarkable. 7, 14, 23, 31, 42, and the bonus number 18. I pulled up the lottery website on Frank's old laptop, the machine taking forever to load pages as usual. When the winning numbers appeared on the screen, I stared at them for a full minute before the reality sank in. Every single number matched perfectly. My hands shook, not from the Parkinson's, but from pure shock. I checked the numbers again, then a third time, comparing them character by character. There was no mistake. The ticket in my trembling fingers was worth exactly $247,000 before taxes. Frank's voice echoed in my memory. Dorothy, when life gives you lemons, make lemonade. But when life gives you a miracle, pay attention to what it's trying to tell you. I sat at that kitchen table for 2 hours, just holding the ticket and thinking. The money could change everything. Home care instead of institutional care, modifications to make the house more accessible, financial security that would let me live independently for as long as physically possible. But something made me hesitate to share this news immediately. Maybe it was the way Michael had dismissed my independence so quickly. Maybe it was the realization that Jennifer and he had been planning my future without consulting me. Or maybe it was simple curiosity about how they'd handle my situation if they believed I was financially vulnerable. I decided to wait, just for a few days, to see how things developed naturally. Michael arrived the following Saturday with Jennifer and a stack of brochures. Sunset Manor. Assisted living featured prominently in their presentation, along with several other facilities they'd apparently researched extensively. The waiting lists for the good places are long, Jennifer explained, spreading glossy pamphlets across my dining room table. We need to get applications submitted soon if we want decent options. I haven't agreed to move anywhere, I reminded them. Michael exchanged a look with his wife, one of those wordless communications that long-married couples perfect. It clearly said, "Here we go." "Mom, we've run the numbers. Your Social Security. Dad's pension, the small savings account. It's not enough to maintain this house and pay for the care you're going to need." I haven't claimed my maximum Social Security benefits yet. I was waiting until... Even with maximum benefits, you're looking at maybe $3,200 a month total income. This house costs you $1,800 in taxes, utilities, and basics. Maintenance alone. That leaves $1,400 for everything else. Food, medication, doctor visits, home modifications you'll need, eventual care assistance. Jennifer leaned forward, her voice taking on the patient tone people use with children. "Dorothy, we're not trying to control your life. We're trying to help you face reality before you're forced into emergency decisions." The lottery ticket upstairs felt like a secret weapon I wasn't ready to deploy. Instead, I listened as they outlined their plan with the efficiency of a corporate presentation. Sunset Manor has an opening in their independent living section, Michael continued. 1 bedroom, kitchenette, all meals provided, medical staff, on site. It's actually quite nice. I'd driven past Sunset Manor countless times. The building looked sterile and institutional, surrounded by perfectly manicured lawns that screamed, "No personality allowed." The thought of leaving my home, my memories, my independence, for a 1-bedroom apartment where meals were provided whether I wanted them or not, felt like death by 1,000 small compromises. What about this house? We'd need to sell it too. Pay for your care. The market's good right now. We're thinking it could go for around $200,000. That would cover several years at Sunset Manor, maybe longer depending on how much care you need. They'd already had the house appraised. The realization hit me like cold water. This wasn't a conversation or even a negotiation. This was notification of decisions already made. And if I refuse? The silence stretched uncomfortably. Jennifer studied her manicured nails while Michael shifted in his chair. Mom, be reasonable. You can't live alone with Parkinson's. What if you fall? What if you forget your medication? What if there's an emergency? What if I'm fine for years? What if the medication works well? What if I want to take those risks because this is my life and my choice? That's selfish thinking, Jennifer interjected, her patience apparently exhausted. Do you have any idea how worried we are? How much stress this puts on our family? Connor and Blake are already asking why Grandma Dorothy is acting strange. What are we supposed to tell them when you have an accident we could have prevented? Selfish. The word hung in the air like smoke. Wanting to remain in my own home, to make my own decisions about my own body and my own future, was selfish. Expecting them to respect my autonomy was apparently an unreasonable burden on their family. But I said nothing about the lottery ticket. Something deep inside me wanted to see exactly how far they'd take this, how little they valued my wishes, when they believed I had no power to resist their plans. That night, alone in the house Frank and I had chosen together, I sat with the winning lottery ticket and faced a truth I'd been avoiding. My son saw me as a problem to be managed, not a person to be respected. The money upstairs could solve the practical issues he'd raised, but it couldn't solve the fundamental issue of how he viewed me, as a burden rather than his mother. The question wasn't whether I could afford to stay in my home. The question was whether I could afford, emotionally and spiritually, to let them make this decision for me without understanding the full picture of who they really were. As I prepared for bed that night, I made a decision that would change everything. I would keep the lottery win secret just a little longer, long enough to see what my family would do when they believed I was truly powerless, long enough to understand what our relationships were really built on. Sometimes the most valuable information comes not from what people say when they think you're watching, but from what they do when they believe you have no choice but to accept it. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The first sign that Michael and Jennifer had moved beyond suggestion into action came on a Wednesday morning when I found a locksmith examining my front door. I'd returned from my weekly grocery trip to Murphy's Corner store to discover a van in my driveway and a uniformed man with tools spread across my porch. "Excuse me," I called out, struggling with my shopping bags and the new tremor that made simple tasks frustratingly difficult. "What are you doing?" The locksmith, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, looked genuinely confused. "Ma'am, I was called about changing the locks for security purposes. Your son, Michael Davis, said you'd had some break-in concerns." Break-in concerns? I'd mentioned no such thing to anyone. My neighborhood on Maple Street was one of the safest in Cleveland, with neighbors like Mrs. Henderson who noticed everything and Mr. Patterson who walked his German Shepherd past my house 3 times daily. "There's been a mistake," I said carefully. "I didn't request any lock changes." The locksmith frowned, checking his work order. "Says here it was requested by Michael Davis, authorized representative. He provided identification and proof of residence connection. Authorized representative." The phrase chilled me more than October's morning frost. "I'm Dorothy Davis. This is my house. I didn't authorize this work." After a brief phone call to his supervisor, the locksmith packed his tools and left with apologetic confusion. But the message was clear. Michael was already positioning himself as my decision-maker, testing boundaries, seeing what he could accomplish without my direct consent. I called him immediately. "Mom, it was just a precaution," he said when I confronted him about the locksmith. "Your neighborhood isn't as safe as it used to be. I thought upgraded locks would give you better security." "You thought. You didn't ask, discuss, or consult. You simply decided what was best for my house. I was trying to help. Why are you making this into a big deal?" This was his pattern, I realized. Present manipulation as care, then characterize my objections as unreasonable overreactions. Frank had warned me about people who used helpfulness as a weapon, though I'd never imagined he was talking about our own son. Because it's my house, Michael. These decisions are mine to make. For now, he said quietly, and the words felt like a threat wrapped in resignation. That afternoon, Jennifer arrived alone while Michael was at work. She carried a clipboard and wore the determined expression I'd learned to associate with unpleasant conversations. "Dorothy, I hope you don't mind me being direct," she began, settling uninvited at my kitchen table. "I'm here because I care about this family, and right now, this family has a problem." I poured tea I didn't want, using the routine to steady my increasingly unreliable hands. "What problem is that?" "You're being stubborn about accepting help, and it's creating stress for everyone. Michael barely slept last night, worrying about you living alone with your condition. Connor asked me yesterday why Grandma Dorothy won't move somewhere safer. Even Blake, who never pays attention to family matters, mentioned that you seemed shaky at dinner last week." The manipulation was elegant in its cruelty. Present my desire for independence as harmful to the grandchildren, paint Michael as the suffering concerned son, position herself as the reasonable mediator trying to solve a problem I was creating through selfish stubbornness. "I'm managing my condition with medical supervision," I replied evenly. Dr. Williams was clear that early-stage Parkinson's doesn't require immediate life changes. Jennifer's smile was patient but condescending. "Dorothy, doctors tell patients what they want to hear. It's called bedside manner. The reality is that Michael and I need to plan for your future, and that planning requires honesty about your limitations." She opened her clipboard, revealing what appeared to be a comprehensive dossier about my life. Financial records, medical information, property assessments, facility comparisons, all organized with the efficiency of a corporate takeover. "We've done extensive research," she continued, flipping through pages. "Sunset Manor is absolutely the best option, but their waiting list is 6 months minimum. Riverside Gardens has immediate availability but costs more. Heritage Park is beautiful but too far from us to visit regularly. You've applied to multiple facilities without telling me. We've inquired about availability and requirements. No applications have been submitted yet." The distinction was meaningless, and we both knew it. "But Dorothy, spots at quality facilities don't wait for people to make up their minds. If you delay too long, you'll end up in whatever has an opening, not necessarily what's best for you." I thought about the lottery ticket upstairs, worth more than enough to pay for premium in-home care, house modifications, private medical staff if needed. Worth more than enough to maintain my independence indefinitely. But I said nothing, mesmerized by the depth of their presumption. What if I refused to move? Jennifer's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "That would be unfortunate. Michael has consulted with an elder law attorney about guardianship procedures. If you become unable to make rational decisions about your care and safety, the court can appoint someone else to make those decisions for you. Guardianship, the nuclear option in family power struggles. Legal declaration that I was incompetent to manage my own affairs, transferring control to someone else, presumably Michael." The threat was delivered with Jennifer's characteristic blend of false concern and steel determination. "Are you threatening me?" "I'm explaining options that nobody wants to pursue. But Dorothy, if you force our hand by refusing reasonable care arrangements, we'll have to explore every legal avenue to protect you from yourself." After she left, I sat in Frank's recliner and tried to process what had just occurred. My daughter-in-law had essentially delivered an ultimatum: cooperate with their plans voluntarily, or they would seek legal authority to override my wishes. Either way, my independence was ending. That evening, I called my older sister Margaret in Phoenix. At 78, she'd maintained her razor-sharp wit and had always been my most trusted confidant. "They're trying to steamroll you," she said bluntly after I explained the situation. "Dorothy, This isn't about your health or safety. This is about control and convenience. Your house is worth money, and managing your care from a distance is easier if you're institutionalized. Maybe they're genuinely worried. Bullshit. Genuine worry involves conversations, not ultimatums. It involves respecting your wishes, not threatening guardianship procedures. You raised that boy better than this. Margaret was right, and I knew it. But admitting it meant acknowledging that my relationship with my son was fundamentally different than I'd believed. It meant accepting that he saw me as a burden to be managed rather than a parent to be honored. What should I do? Fight back. You're not helpless, Dorothy. You have options they don't know about. She was referring to my financial resources, though she didn't know about the lottery win. Even without that windfall, I had more savings than Michael and Jennifer realized, and my house was worth considerably more than their conservative estimates. But the lottery ticket represented something beyond money. It represented the power to make choices, to maintain dignity, to prove that their assumptions about my helplessness were fundamentally wrong. The next morning, I called Sunset Manor directly. I understand my son has been inquiring about accommodations for me, I told the intake coordinator. Yes, Mrs. Davis. Mr. Davis has been very thorough in his questions about our services. He mentioned your Parkinson's diagnosis and expressed urgency about securing appropriate care. I'm calling to clarify that I have not authorized any applications or commitments. Any arrangements he's discussed are unauthorized. There was a pause. I see. We'll make a note in your file. We do require direct consent from residents or their legal guardians before proceeding with admissions. Legal guardians. The phrase appeared everywhere now, like a warning or a promise. That afternoon, Michael called, his voice tight with controlled anger. Mom, Sunset Manor called me. They said you contacted them to cancel inquiries I never made. You're making me look like I'm trying to commit you against your will. Aren't you? The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. I'm trying to ensure you receive appropriate care for a progressive neurological condition. If you want to characterize that as some kind of betrayal, that's your choice. And if I want to characterize threatening guardianship proceedings as manipulation and control, that's my choice too. Jennifer mentioned that conversation. His voice was carefully neutral. She was explaining worst-case scenarios, not making threats. But Mom, if you continue refusing reasonable care options, those scenarios become more likely. The lottery ticket upstairs felt like a secret weapon I was saving for the right moment. But each conversation with Michael made me realize the right moment might be farther away than I'd hoped. This wasn't just about money or practical care arrangements. This was about fundamental questions of respect and family dynamics that money alone couldn't resolve. As I hung up the phone, I made a decision that would test everything. I would let their plans proceed a little further. I would see exactly how far they were willing to go, how much of my autonomy they were prepared to strip away, before revealing that I had the power to stop everything. Sometimes the most important battles require patience. Sometimes you have to let people show you exactly who they are before you decide what to do about it. The lottery ticket would wait. My dignity, however, would not. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening when I discovered Michael had contacted my bank. I'd gone to withdraw cash for my weekly expenses when the teller, young Amanda Chen, who'd been handling my transactions for 3 years, gave me an apologetic smile that immediately put me on guard. Mrs. Davis, I need to mention that your son stopped by yesterday with some concerns about your account security. My blood pressure spiked so sharply I could feel it in my temples. What kind of concerns? Amanda glanced around the busy bank lobby, clearly uncomfortable. He mentioned your recent health diagnosis and wanted to discuss adding himself as a joint account holder for your protection. Of course, we explained that any changes would require your direct authorization. Joint account holder. The phrase hit me like a physical blow. Michael was systematically moving to gain control over every aspect of my life. My home, my healthcare decisions, and now my finances. The lottery ticket upstairs represented $2.3 million he didn't know existed, but he was already maneuvering to control the modest savings he thought were my only resources. What exactly did he say? He provided documentation about your Parkinson's diagnosis and expressed concern that you might become vulnerable to financial exploitation or forget important transactions. He seemed very knowledgeable about elder fraud prevention. Elder fraud prevention. The irony was staggering. My son was positioning himself as my protector while simultaneously orchestrating the most comprehensive financial manipulation I'd ever experienced. Did he request any specific information about my accounts? Amanda hesitated. He asked about unusual activity, large withdrawals, and whether we'd noticed any concerning patterns in your banking behavior. We assured him that your account management has been completely normal and responsible. That evening, I called my attorney, Robert Sterling, whom Frank and I had used for estate planning years earlier. At 76, Robert had seen every variation of family financial drama and spoke with the weary wisdom of someone who'd watched greed destroy countless relationships. Dorothy, what you're describing is called financial abuse, and it's more common than you might think, he said after I explained the situation. Adult children often use health scares as justification for seizing control of their parents' assets. But Michael genuinely believes he's helping me. Maybe he does. But good intentions don't justify bad actions. Contacting your bank without authorization, threatening guardianship proceedings, making medical facility inquiries without consent. These are serious overreaches of boundaries. Robert's voice grew stern. Dorothy, I need to ask directly. Do you want Michael to have any control over your finances or healthcare decisions? The question was simple, but the answer required confronting a painful truth. No, I want to maintain control over my own life. Then we need to act quickly. Have you considered updating your power of attorney documents? Currently, who would make decisions if you became incapacitated? I realized with horror that my existing documents, written years ago, named Michael as my primary agent. At the time, it had seemed natural. He was my responsible, successful son, who would surely act in my best interests. Now those same documents represented a loaded gun he could use against me if circumstances became desperate enough. I want to change everything, I said firmly. Michael should not have decision-making authority over any aspect of my life. That night, I lay awake thinking about the lottery ticket hidden in my jewelry box. The money could solve every practical problem Michael had raised. I could hire the best home care available, modify my house for accessibility, ensure premium medical treatment, and maintain complete independence for decades. But revealing the windfall now would look reactive, like I was only asserting my independence because I suddenly had the financial means to do so. More troubling was the growing realization that this wasn't really about money at all. Even if I'd been genuinely poor and vulnerable, Michael's approach was wrong. Threatening guardianship, contacting my bank without permission, making facility arrangements without consent, these actions revealed something fundamental about how he viewed me as a person. The lottery win had given me an unexpected gift: the ability to see my family's true priorities when they believed I was powerless. What I was discovering wasn't pretty. Friday morning brought an unwelcome surprise. I answered my doorbell to find Dr. Patricia Williams standing on my porch, looking professionally uncomfortable. Mrs. Davis, I hope you don't mind my stopping by. Your son Michael contacted me with some concerns about your living situation. Of course he had. What kind of concerns? He mentioned that you're resisting necessary care arrangements and wondered if your judgment might be affected by your diagnosis. He asked me to do a home wellness check. I felt like a mouse watching a trap close around me. Michael was building a comprehensive case for my incompetence, gathering professional opinions to support his narrative that I couldn't manage my own affairs. Dr. Williams, when we met in your office, did you have any concerns about my mental capacity or judgment? She looked genuinely puzzled. None whatsoever. Your cognitive function appeared completely normal. That's why I'm confused about your son's concerns. I invited her in for coffee, using the opportunity to demonstrate exactly how well I was managing my daily life. My house was clean and organized, my medications properly sorted, my bills current, my physical condition stable. After 30 minutes of conversation, Dr. Williams seemed satisfied. Mrs. Davis, I see no evidence of cognitive impairment or poor judgment. Your Parkinson's symptoms are well controlled, and you appear to be managing independently without difficulty. As she prepared to leave, I asked the question that had been weighing on me. Doctor, in your professional opinion, would I benefit from immediate assisted living placement? Absolutely not. Early-stage Parkinson's with good medication response and strong cognitive function? You could maintain independent living for years, possibly decades, with appropriate support services when needed. After she left, I called Michael immediately. I understand you contacted Dr. Williams about my mental capacity. His defensive tone told me everything. I was concerned about your judgment, Mom. Your refusal to consider reasonable care options seemed out of character. She found no evidence of impaired judgment or cognitive problems. Well, that's good news. He didn't sound like it was good news. Michael, I want to be very clear about something. Stop contacting my doctors, my bank, or anyone else about my affairs without my explicit permission. This behavior needs to end immediately. Or what? The question hung in the air like a challenge. He was calling my bluff, testing whether I had any actual power to stop his interference in my life. Or I'll take legal action to protect myself. He laughed. Actually laughed. Mom, you can barely afford your current expenses. Legal action requires lawyers, and lawyers cost money you don't have. If only he knew. The lottery ticket upstairs represented more legal firepower than he could imagine. But I still wasn't ready to reveal that card. That weekend, Jennifer arrived with a new strategy. She brought Connor and Blake, my 14-year-old grandsons, clearly intending to use emotional manipulation where direct confrontation had failed. Grandma. Dorothy? Connor said awkwardly, obviously coached. We're worried about you living alone. What if something happens and nobody's here to help? Blake, always the more direct child, cut straight to the point. Mom says you might fall down and not be able to get up. That's scary. I looked at these boys I loved, being used as weapons in their parents' campaign to control my life. The cruelty of it took my breath away. Boys, I appreciate your concern, but I'm managing very well. If I need help, I know how to ask for it. Jennifer stepped forward with her practiced smile. Dorothy, the boys have been having nightmares about something happening to you. Blake even asked his teacher about what happens when grandparents get sick and won't accept help. The manipulation was breathtaking in its audacity. Use my grandson's genuine affection as leverage, paint my independence as harmful to children, position my resistance as the cause of family trauma. Jennifer, these children are being frightened unnecessarily. There's no emergency here, isn't there? Her mask slipped slightly. Dorothy, you're 72 with a degenerative neurological condition, living alone in a house that's too big for you, with no family nearby and limited financial resources. If that's not an emergency, what is? Limited financial resources. If only she knew how wrong she was about that particular detail. As they left, Connor hugged me goodbye with unusual intensity. Please don't be stubborn, Grandma, he whispered. We just want you to be safe. After they were gone, I sat in my kitchen and faced the truth I'd been avoiding. This wasn't going to end with reasonable conversation or boundary setting. Michael and Jennifer were committed to their plan, and they would escalate their tactics until they achieved their goal. The lottery ticket upstairs represented more than money. It represented choice, power, and the ability to fight back effectively. But it also represented a test of character, both theirs and mine. I made a decision that would change everything. I would give them exactly what they thought they wanted. I would let them believe they'd won. And then, When they showed me who they really were, I would show them who I really was. Sometimes the best defense is a strategic retreat. Sometimes you have to lose a battle to win the war. The real confrontation was still coming. The breaking point came 3 weeks later with a certified letter that arrived on a gray November morning. The return address showed the law offices of Harrison, Mitchell & Associates. Inside was a formal notice that Michael had petitioned the county probate court for emergency guardianship based on my alleged diminished capacity and unsafe living conditions. I sat at my kitchen table, reading the legal document that essentially declared me incompetent to manage my own affairs. The petition cited my Parkinson's diagnosis, my irrational resistance to appropriate care, my social isolation, and what they termed concerning changes in judgment and decision-making abilities. Every conversation we'd had, every boundary I'd set every time I'd asserted my independence, it had all been documented and twisted into evidence of mental decline. Michael hadn't just been arguing with me, he'd been building a legal case. The hearing was scheduled for December 15th, just 3 weeks away. If successful, the petition would transfer complete control of my finances, healthcare, and living arrangements to Michael as my court-appointed guardian. I would become, legally speaking, no different from a child. My hands shook as I called Robert Sterling. "Dorothy, this is serious," he said after I read him the petition. "Emergency guardianship proceedings move quickly, and the standards for evidence are lower than you might expect. Michael's gathered statements from multiple sources." "What kind of statements?" "Let me see. Dr. Williams apparently documented his concerns about your home situation, though she notes no cognitive impairment. There's a statement from Sunset Manor about your son's inquiries regarding urgent placement needs. Your bank provided information about your son's concerns regarding account security, and there are affidavits from Jennifer and both grandsons about your concerning behavior and their fears for your safety." Each revelation felt like a betrayal. Dr. Williams's home visit, which I'd thought went well, had been documented as evidence of concerning independence. The bank had apparently provided information despite their assurances of confidentiality. Even my grandsons had been coerced into signing statements against me. "Can we fight this?" "Absolutely. But it will require immediate action and substantial legal fees. We're talking about at least $50,000 for a proper defense, possibly more if it goes to appeal." $50,000. To Michael and Jennifer, this figure would seem impossible for me to manage. They'd calculated that I couldn't afford to fight their legal maneuvering, that I'd be forced to accept guardianship simply because I lacked the resources to oppose it. They had no idea about the lottery ticket upstairs. That afternoon, I drove to the state lottery office in Columbus, a 2-hour journey that gave me time to think about what I was about to unleash. The building was surprisingly ordinary, just another government office with fluorescent lighting and worn carpeting. "Congratulations, Mrs. Davis," said the claims processor, a cheerful woman named Sandra Martinez who handled my paperwork with professional enthusiasm. "After taxes, your net payout comes to approximately $1,747,000. Would you prefer the lump sum or annual payments?" "Lump sum, definitely." Within 3 hours, I was officially a millionaire. The money was transferred to a new account at a different bank, one where Michael had no contacts or influence. For the first time in months, I felt the intoxicating sensation of having real power over my own life. But I still wasn't ready to reveal my windfall. I wanted to see exactly how far Michael would take his manipulation when he believed I was truly defenseless. The answer came the following Monday when he arrived at my door with Jennifer, 2 official-looking men I didn't recognize, and a moving truck. "Mom, we need to talk," Michael said, pushing past me into my living room without invitation. The 2 strangers introduced themselves as representatives from Heritage Park Assisted Living. They'd come to assess my immediate placement needs and facilitate a smooth transition to appropriate care. "I haven't agreed to move anywhere," I said, but my voice sounded weak even to me. Jennifer stepped forward with a folder full of documents. Dorothy, we've tried to do this the easy way. You've forced us to take legal action, but we don't have to wait for the court hearing to begin making arrangements. One of the Heritage Park representatives, a soft-spoken man named David Chen, tried to sound reassuring. Mrs. Davis, we understand transitions can be difficult. We're here to make this process as comfortable as possible. What if I refuse to go? Michael's expression hardened. Mom, you have two choices. You can cooperate with voluntary placement at Heritage Park, which is a very nice facility, or you can wait for the court to order involuntary placement somewhere less desirable. Either way, you're not staying in this house alone. The moving truck outside suddenly made sense. They weren't just threatening to move me. They were doing it, with or without my consent. The court hearing isn't for 3 weeks, I protested. Emergency placement can be arranged immediately for individuals deemed at imminent risk, Jennifer explained with clinical detachment. Dr. Williams's report about your isolated living situation and declining function provides sufficient justification. Dr. Williams had reported declining function? I remembered our conversation as entirely positive, but apparently her documentation told a different story. I want to call my attorney. Of course, Michael said, but his tone suggested this was merely a courtesy. Though I should mention that Heritage Park requires a significant deposit to hold your space. The movers are scheduled to begin packing your belongings this afternoon. I walked to my bedroom on unsteady legs, ostensibly to call Robert Sterling, but really to touch the lottery ticket one more time. Hidden in my jewelry box, it represented the power to stop everything happening around me. But I still wasn't ready to play that card. Instead, I called Robert from my bedroom. Dorothy, they can't legally force you to move before the court hearing, he said immediately. This is intimidation, pure and simple. Can you stop them? I can try, but it will take time to get an emergency injunction. Where are you right now? In my bedroom while they pack my living room. Don't sign anything. Don't agree to anything. Tell them you're consulting with legal counsel and any action taken without court approval will be challenged. When I returned to the living room, 2 movers were already wrapping my furniture in protective padding. The sight of strangers handling Frank's belongings, packing up 40 years of memories, felt like watching my life being dismantled piece by piece. I've spoken with my attorney, I announced. He says you can't legally force this move without a court order. Michael barely looked up from the documents he was organizing. Mom, you can make this easy or difficult, but the outcome is the same. You're not safe living alone, and we're not going to stand by and watch you hurt yourself out of stubborn pride. This isn't about pride. This is about my right to make my own decisions. Jennifer laughed, actually laughed. Dorothy, your decision-making is exactly the problem. Normal people don't fight this hard against help they obviously need. The Heritage Park representative tried to mediate. Mrs. Davis, perhaps you'd like to tour our facility before making any final decisions? We have a beautiful apartment available with excellent views. I don't want to tour your facility. I want everyone to leave my house immediately. The room fell silent except for the sounds of packing. Michael and Jennifer exchanged glances, then Michael nodded toward the kitchen. They stepped away for a private conversation I couldn't hear but could easily interpret from their body language. They were deciding how far to push. When they returned, Michael's expression was set with grim determination. Mom, I didn't want it to come to this, but you're forcing my hand. The Heritage Park deposit is $8,000. Your checking account has approximately $4,000. Your savings account has maybe $6,000 more. You literally can't afford to fight us, and you can't afford alternative arrangements. He was right about my known accounts, wrong about my actual resources. But I let him continue. We've already paid the Heritage Park deposit from our own funds, partly as a loan you'll repay from the house sale, partly as a gift because we love you. The movers are paid for. The legal costs for the guardianship petition are covered. All you have to do is accept help. Help. Such a benign word for such complete control over another person's life. And if I refuse, then you'll sit in this empty house with no furniture, no family support, and no financial resources to maintain it, until the court orders your placement somewhere you'll like a lot less than Heritage Park. I looked around my living room, now half empty, my belongings sorted into boxes labeled keep, donate, and storage. They'd already decided what parts of my life were worth preserving. "Give me tonight to think about it," I said finally. Michael softened slightly. "Of course, Mom. Take all the time you need. But the movers finish tomorrow and Heritage Park is expecting you by Thursday." After they left, I sat alone in my partially dismantled home and faced the truth I'd been avoiding. This wasn't about my health, my safety, or my well-being. This was about power, control, and convenience. Michael and Jennifer had decided I was a problem to be solved, and they were solving it with the ruthless efficiency of a hostile corporate takeover. The lottery ticket upstairs represented more than money. It represented the power to fight back, to expose their true motivations, and to reclaim control over my own life. Tomorrow, I would show them exactly who they were dealing with. Tomorrow, everything would change. The next morning, I woke up in my half-empty bedroom and made a phone call that would change everything. Not to Michael, not to Heritage Park, not even to my attorney. I called Sandra Martinez at the lottery office. "Mrs. Davis, how can I help you today? I need you to prepare official documentation of my lottery win, including the exact date and amount. I also need a certified letter confirming my financial status for legal proceedings." "Of course. May I ask what this is regarding? My family is trying to have me declared incompetent. They think I'm too poor to fight them." Sandra's voice filled with indignation. "Oh my. Well, Mrs. Davis, I think we can help clarify your financial situation quite definitively." While I waited for the documentation, I called Robert Sterling with instructions that must have surprised him. "Robert, I want you to file an emergency motion to stop the guardianship proceedings, and I want you to schedule a press conference for this afternoon." "A press conference? Dorothy, that's highly unusual for— Trust me on this. Also, send a cease and desist letter to Heritage Park. They're attempting to collect payment for services I never authorized." "Dorothy, these actions will be expensive. Are you sure you can—" "Robert, by this afternoon, you'll understand exactly what I can afford." At 10 a.m., Michael arrived with the movers to complete yesterday's work. He found me sitting calmly at my kitchen table, dressed in my best navy suit, hair freshly styled, makeup carefully applied. I looked nothing like the defeated woman he'd left the day before. "Mom, you look nice. Ready for your new adventure?" "Sit down, Michael. We need to talk." Something in my tone made him pause. Jennifer, who'd been directing the movers, came into the kitchen with a concerned expression. "Dorothy, the truck needs to be loaded by noon. Heritage Park is expecting—" "Heritage Park can cancel their expectations. The move is off." Michael's patience finally snapped. "Mom, enough. You can't afford to fight this. You can't afford to stay here alone, and you can't afford to keep making bad decisions. This is happening whether you like it or not." I reached into my purse and placed a folder on the kitchen table. "Michael, I want you to look at these documents very carefully." Inside the folder were the lottery office certifications, bank statements showing my new account balance, and a letter from Robert Sterling outlining the legal actions we'd be taking against anyone who had attempted to manipulate or coerce me. Michael opened the folder with visible irritation, clearly expecting more futile legal threats he could dismiss. His expression changed as he read the first page, then the second. By the third page, his face had gone completely white. "What is this?" "It's documentation that I won $2.3 million in the state lottery 3 weeks ago. After taxes, I netted approximately $1.6 million, which is currently sitting in an account you don't have access to." The silence in my kitchen was absolute. Jennifer grabbed the papers from Michael's hands, her eyes growing wider with each page. "This can't be real," she whispered. "It's very real. I bought the winning ticket at Murphy's Corner Store on October 15th. I claimed the prize yesterday. Sandra Martinez at the lottery office can verify every detail." Michael's voice was barely audible. You've had this money for weeks?" "I've had the winning ticket for weeks. I claimed the money yesterday after you filed for guardianship and showed up with movers to force me from my home." Jennifer's shock was transforming into something uglier. "You let us think you were poor. You let us worry about your finances. You manipulated us." The accusation was so perfectly backwards that I almost laughed. "I manipulated you? Jennifer, you threatened to have me declared mentally incompetent. You used my grandsons as emotional weapons. You contacted my bank, my doctor, and my attorney without permission. You showed up yesterday with a moving truck and facility representatives to force me from my home. Exactly who was manipulating whom?" Michael was staring at the bank statements like they might disappear if he looked away. "Mom, if you had this money, why didn't you just tell us? We could have arranged in-home care, house modifications, whatever you needed." "Because, Michael, I wanted to see what you would do when you thought I was powerless. I wanted to understand what your concern for my welfare was really worth." The truth hung in the air between us like a toxic cloud. They hadn't been worried about my health or safety. They'd been managing what they perceived as my poverty and vulnerability. The moment real money entered the equation, everything changed. "This changes everything," Jennifer said, her mind clearly racing through new calculations. "Dorothy, with resources like this, we could arrange the most amazing care for you. Private nurses, home modifications, the best medical treatment available." "We?" I stood up from the table, my voice carrying an authority I hadn't felt in months. "There is no we in my medical care, Jennifer. There never should have been." Michael tried a different approach. "Mom, I know you're angry, but think about what this means for your future. You could stay in the house, hire help, live exactly how you want. We were only trying to protect you when you thought I was poor and defenseless, you tried to control every aspect of my life. Now that you know I'm wealthy, suddenly I'm capable of making my own decisions again?" The movers had stopped working, clearly sensing the drama unfolding in the kitchen. Through the window, I could see neighbors gathering, drawn by the commotion of trucks and raised voices. "Look," Michael said, attempting to regain control of the situation. "Obviously, there's been a misunderstanding. Let's call off the heritage park arrangement, cancel the legal proceedings, and start fresh with this new information." Start fresh? I looked at this man who'd raised me, who'd once been the little boy I'd taught to ride a bicycle and helped with homework. "Michael, you filed a legal petition declaring me mentally incompetent. You documented private conversations as evidence of my decline. You coerced your own children into signing statements against me. You contacted my bank, my doctor, and my attorney to build a case for stripping away my civil rights. Exactly which part of that represents a misunderstanding?" Jennifer stepped forward, her expression shifting into damage control mode. "Dorothy, we were scared. Your diagnosis frightened us, and we reacted poorly. But everything we did came from love and concern. Love doesn't threaten guardianship proceedings when someone disagrees with you. Concern doesn't involve forced relocation and financial manipulation. What you demonstrated wasn't love, Jennifer. It was control." At that moment, Robert Sterling arrived with two other men I didn't recognize. One introduced himself as Detective James Morrison from the Financial Crimes Unit. The other was a reporter from the Cleveland Plain Dealer whom Robert had apparently contacted. "Mrs. Davis," Detective Morrison said, "we understand there may have been attempts to manipulate your finances and living situation under false pretenses." Michael's face went from white to gray. "Now, wait just a minute. This is a family matter." "Actually, sir, elder financial abuse is a criminal matter, regardless of family relationships. the detective replied. Mrs. Davis, would you like to file a formal complaint? I looked at my son and daughter-in-law, both of whom suddenly looked very small and very frightened. For weeks, they'd held all the power in our relationship. They'd made decisions about my life, my money, my future, all while believing I was too weak to fight back. Now the tables had turned completely. Detective Morrison, I'd like to discuss the possibility of charges related to attempted financial exploitation and fraudulent guardianship proceedings. The reporter was taking notes rapidly. This story, wealthy widow nearly loses everything to greedy family members, would make headlines. Michael's attorney facade finally crumbled. Mom, please. You're going to destroy our family over a misunderstanding. Think about Connor and Blake. Think about what this will do to them. I thought about Connor and Blake when you used them to manipulate me. I thought about them when you made them sign statements against their grandmother. Where was your concern for them then? Jennifer was crying now, but they struck me as tears of frustration rather than genuine remorse. Dorothy, we made mistakes, but we can fix this. We can make it right. You're right, Jennifer. We can make it right. Here's how we're going to do that. I walked to my window, looking out at the moving truck, the gathering neighbors, the disrupted life I was about to reclaim. The movers will return every single item they've packed. The Heritage Park deposit will be refunded immediately. You will withdraw the guardianship petition and issue a public apology for filing fraudulent claims. And most importantly, you will never again attempt to make decisions about my life, my finances, or my medical care without my explicit consent. Michael and Jennifer exchanged desperate glances. They'd overplayed their hand catastrophically, and now they were facing consequences they'd never anticipated. And if we don't agree? Michael asked weakly. I turned to Detective Morrison. Then we'll let the legal system determine appropriate penalties for elder abuse and fraud. The lottery ticket had been worth more than money. It had been worth the truth. The Cleveland Plain Dealer headline 3 days later read, Local woman's lottery win exposes family's elder abuse scheme. The article, complete with my photo and quotes from Detective Morrison, sent shockwaves through our quiet neighborhood and Michael's professional community. I was sitting in my fully restored living room, furniture returned to its proper places, when my phone began ringing with calls from reporters, distant relatives, and neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years. But the most important call came from someone unexpected. My grandson Connor. Grandma. Dorothy, I need to see you. Can I come over after school? He arrived that afternoon looking older than his 14 years, carrying a backpack and wearing an expression of profound confusion and guilt. Grandma, I'm so sorry, he said before he'd even fully entered my house. Mom and Dad made me sign that paper. They said you were sick and might hurt yourself if we didn't help them take care of you. I guided him to the kitchen table where just days earlier I'd revealed the truth to his parents. Connor, you don't owe me any apologies. You were put in an impossible position by adults who should have protected you from this situation. But I signed it. I said you were acting weird and that I was scared for you. None of that was true. The pain in his young voice broke my heart. Michael and Jennifer hadn't just manipulated me. They'd corrupted their own children, teaching them that lying was acceptable when it served their purposes. Tell me what really happened, I said gently. Connor's story unfolded like a master class in emotional manipulation. His parents had spent weeks preparing him and Blake, describing my declining condition and dangerous behavior. They'd shown the boys articles about elderly people who died in preventable accidents, created scenarios where I might fall or forget to turn off the stove, painted pictures of finding their grandmother dead because no one had been brave enough to intervene. They made it sound like signing that paper was the only way to save your life, Connor explained, tears streaming down his face. They said if we really loved you, we'd help them keep you safe even if you didn't understand what was best for you. The sophistication of their manipulation was breathtaking. They'd weaponized these children's love for me, turning their genuine care into tools for my destruction. Connor, look at me. I waited until his eyes met mine. What your parents did was wrong, and it wasn't your fault. You were given false information and manipulated by adults you trusted. The responsibility lies with them, not with you. As Connor was leaving, he turned back with a question that nearly undid me. Grandma, are you going to forgive them? Mom's been crying for 3 days, and Dad keeps saying this will ruin everything. I chose my words carefully. Connor, forgiveness is complicated. What your parents did caused real harm and revealed things about their character that can't be unseen. Forgiveness doesn't mean pretending those things didn't happen or allowing them to happen again. That evening, I received an unexpected visitor. Blake, Connor's twin, arrived alone just as darkness was falling. Where Connor was emotional and apologetic, Blake was analytical and angry. Grandma Dorothy, I've been thinking about everything that happened, and I have questions. At 14, Blake was already showing signs of the sharp intelligence that ran in our family. But unlike his father, he seemed to be using it for truth-seeking rather than manipulation. What kind of questions? Well, if you had all that money, why didn't you just tell Mom and Dad from the beginning? Wouldn't that have avoided this whole mess? It was a fair question from someone too young to fully understand the complexities of adult relationships and power dynamics. Blake, imagine you had something valuable that you weren't ready to share yet. Then imagine someone tried to take control of your life by convincing everyone you were too stupid or sick to take care of yourself. Would you reward that behavior? By giving them what they wanted? He considered this. No. I guess I'd want to see what they would do if they thought I really couldn't fight back. Exactly. I wanted to understand what your parents' concern for me was really based on. Was it love and genuine worry? Or was it about control and their own convenience? Blake nodded slowly. And when they thought you were poor and helpless, they tried to control everything about your life. But when they found out you were rich, suddenly you were capable of making your own decisions again. That's right. So their concern wasn't really about your health or safety. It was about managing what they saw as a problem. The clarity of his analysis impressed me. Blake, you understand this situation better than most adults would. It's not fair, he said quietly. Parents are supposed to protect their kids and respect their grandparents. Mine did neither. 2 weeks later, the legal consequences began, manifesting in ways Michael and Jennifer had never anticipated. The financial crimes investigation had expanded beyond my case after Detective Morrison discovered that Michael's law firm had several other questionable guardianship cases involving elderly clients with valuable assets. Robert Sterling called with updates that were both satisfying and sobering. Dorothy, the State Bar Association is reviewing Michael's license to practice law. 3 other families have come forward with similar stories about premature guardianship recommendations and suspicious asset management. The revelation that my case wasn't isolated made everything worse. Michael hadn't just betrayed his mother. He'd been systematically exploiting vulnerable elderly clients through his professional practice. What about the criminal charges? The district attorney is moving forward with charges of attempted elder financial abuse and fraud related to the guardianship petition. Jennifer could face charges as a co-conspirator. The professional consequences were equally devastating. Michael's law firm terminated his partnership immediately after the newspaper article appeared. Jennifer lost her position as a bank loan officer when her employer decided that someone involved in elder abuse couldn't be trusted with other people's financial information. Their house in the upscale development went on the market within a month, and neighbors reported seeing moving trucks there as well. Unlike my forced relocation, theirs was driven by genuine financial necessity and social ostracism. But the most painful consequence was the family fracture that might never heal. Sarah, my daughter who lived in Seattle, called after reading about the situation online. Mom, I can't believe Michael would do this to you. I mean, I always knew he could be controlling, but this is beyond anything I imagined. Sarah's support meant everything to me, but it also revealed how completely our family had been divided. She hadn't spoken to Michael in 2 years following a disagreement about their father's estate, and my situation had only widened that gulf. I keep thinking about Dad, she continued. What would he say about his son trying to have his wife declared incompetent so he could control her money? Frank would have been devastated. He'd always been proud of Michael's success, had helped pay for law school, had bragged about his son, the attorney. Learning that Michael had used his legal knowledge to exploit elderly people would have broken Frank's heart. A month after the revelation, I was surprised to receive a handwritten letter from Jennifer. Not Michael. He apparently still couldn't bring himself to communicate directly, but a 5-page letter from his wife that attempted to explain, justify, and apologize for their behavior. The letter revealed details I hadn't known. Michael's law firm had been struggling financially for months before my diagnosis. Their house payments were 3 months behind. Connor and Blake's private school tuition was overdue. Jennifer's job at the bank was already in jeopardy due to performance issues. My Parkinson's diagnosis hadn't created their financial crisis, but it had presented what they saw as a solution. My house, they'd calculated, was worth enough to solve their immediate problems. Getting me into assisted living would free up that asset while allowing them to maintain the fiction that they were acting in my best interests. The letter's most revealing passage came near the end. Dorothy, we convinced ourselves that taking control of your situation was the responsible thing to do. We told ourselves that elderly people with degenerative diseases inevitably become burdens on their families, and that managing your assets proactively was just good planning. We never stopped to consider that you might want different things for your life, or that you had the right to make choices we disagreed with. The honesty was refreshing, but it also confirmed my worst fears about how they'd viewed me. I hadn't been a person with autonomy and preferences. I'd been a problem requiring management, an asset requiring optimization, a burden requiring efficient distribution. The lottery win hadn't just revealed their greed. It had exposed their fundamental inability to see me as anything other than an object to be manipulated for their benefit. As I finished reading Jennifer's letter, I realized that the money had given me something more valuable than financial security. It had given me the truth about relationships I'd treasured, people I'd loved, and the family I thought I belonged to. Sometimes the most expensive gifts are the ones that cost us our illusions. 6 months after the revelation, I stood in the newly renovated bathroom of my Maple Street home, admiring the grab bars, walk-in shower, and other accessibility features that my lottery winnings had made possible. The modifications weren't just practical, they were symbolic. This was my house, modified according to my preferences, designed to support my independence for years to come. Dr. Williams had been amazed by my improved health markers during my latest appointment. My blood pressure had stabilized, my stress-related symptoms had disappeared, and even my Parkinson's symptoms seemed more manageable with proper medication and the peace of mind that came from controlling my own life. Mrs. Davis, whatever changes you've made in your living situation, they're working remarkably well, she'd said, reviewing my chart. Your overall health profile has improved dramatically. The irony wasn't lost on me. Michael and Jennifer's greatest fear, that my health would decline without their intervention, had proven completely backward. My health had improved dramatically once I'd removed their toxic influence from my life. The house itself had become a showcase for aging in place with dignity. I'd hired Maria Santos, a certified home health aide who came 3 times a week to help with cleaning and meal preparation. Unlike the institutional care Michael had envisioned, Maria treated me as an employer rather than a patient, respecting my preferences and supporting my independence rather than replacing it. I'd also made changes that went beyond medical necessity. The kitchen had been updated with modern appliances and better lighting. The garden, neglected during months of family crisis, had been professionally landscaped with raised beds that accommodated my mobility limitations. The basement had been converted into a comfortable apartment for live-in help when and if I eventually needed it. Most importantly, I'd filled the house with life again. My neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, had become a regular visitor, often joining me for afternoon tea and neighborhood gossip. Mr. Patterson, the dog walker, had started stopping by to check on me after his evening walks. The isolation that Michael and Jennifer had cited as evidence of my decline had been replaced by a genuine community of people who respected my autonomy. But the most significant change involved my grandsons. Connor and Blake had been visiting regularly since their parents' disgrace, often staying overnight on weekends. Without Michael and Jennifer's toxic influence, my relationships with them had deepened in ways I'd never expected. Connor, once the more compliant twin, had developed a fierce protective streak regarding my independence. He'd appointed himself as my technology consultant, setting up security cameras, teaching me to use a medical alert system, and helping me manage my online banking and investment accounts. "Grandma Dorothy," he'd said during one of our financial planning sessions, "I want to make sure that nobody ever tries to control your money again. Let me show you how to check your accounts from your tablet." Blake had taken a different approach. His analytical mind had become fascinated with the legal and ethical dimensions of what his parents had attempted. He'd started researching elder rights advocacy and had even written a school paper about financial abuse of elderly people that had won a statewide competition. "I want to understand how this happens to other families," he'd told me. "Maybe there's a way to prevent it or stop it before it goes as far as it did with us." Their father's criminal trial had become a source of education rather than shame for them. Both boys attended court proceedings when permitted, watching their father face consequences for his actions while learning about justice and accountability. The trial itself had been both vindicating and heartbreaking. Michael had entered a plea agreement that included restitution to his other victims, community service, a suspended law license, and 3 years of probation. The prosecutor had been clear that only my decision not to press for maximum penalties had kept him out of prison. "Mrs. Davis has shown remarkable compassion toward someone who betrayed her trust in the most fundamental way," District Attorney Catherine Walsh had said during the sentencing hearing. Her willingness to accept this plea agreement reflects her hope that Mr. Davis can someday become the man she raised him to be. Jennifer had received a lighter sentence, community service and mandatory counseling about elder abuse, but had been required to issue a public apology that was published in the same newspaper that had originally exposed their scheme. Watching my son accept responsibility for his actions had been one of the most difficult experiences of my life. This was the little boy I'd taught to ride a bicycle, the teenager I'd helped through college applications, the young lawyer I'd been so proud of. Seeing him in a courtroom as a defendant rather than an attorney had felt like watching the death of someone I'd loved. But it had also been necessary. Actions have consequences, and Michael's actions had harmed not just me, but several other elderly clients who'd trusted him with their most vulnerable moments. The most unexpected development had been a letter from a woman named Eleanor Price, whose elderly mother had been one of Michael's other victims. "Mrs. Davis," she'd written, "I wanted to thank you for having the courage to expose what your son was doing. Because of your bravery, my mother got her assets back and was able to return to her own home instead of being forced into institutional care she didn't want or need." Eleanor's letter had included photos of her mother, 88-year-old Ruth Price, back in her own kitchen, surrounded by the belongings Michael had tried to force her to sell. The smile on Ruth's face had reminded me powerfully of my own joy at reclaiming my independence. I'd started corresponding with Eleanor and Ruth, and eventually with the families of Michael's other victims. What had begun as a personal betrayal had connected me to a community of people who'd experienced similar attempts at control and manipulation by adult children or legal representatives. Together, we'd formed an informal support network for elderly people facing family pressure to surrender their independence. We called ourselves the Silver Defenders, a name Blake had suggested, and met monthly at the community center to share resources, legal information, and emotional support. Our group had grown to include not just victims of family manipulation, but also allies like Dr. Williams, who'd volunteered to speak about the medical aspects of aging in place, and Detective Morrison, who'd provided information about recognizing and reporting elder abuse. The Silver Defenders had become more than a support group. We'd become advocates, working with local lawmakers to strengthen protections for elderly people and to create better oversight for guardianship proceedings. Blake had even started attending our meetings, taking notes and asking insightful questions about how to prevent what had happened to our families. 3 months after the trial, I received a letter that I'd been both expecting and dreading. Michael had written from his court-ordered community service assignment at a homeless shelter, where he was working while trying to rebuild his legal career. "Mom," the letter began, "I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, but I need you to understand that I never intended for things to go as far as they did. What started as genuine concern for your welfare became something I don't recognize and am deeply ashamed of." The letter continued for 3 pages, detailing his financial pressures, his rationalization process, and his growing awareness of how completely he'd betrayed my trust. But it was his conclusion that affected me most profoundly. I've spent months in counseling trying to understand how I became someone who could treat his own mother as a problem to be solved, rather than a person to be respected. The counselor says that my inability to see you as autonomous and capable was a form of ageism that I'd never recognized in myself. I'm working to change that, but I understand if you can never trust me again. The letter sat on my kitchen table for days before I could bring myself to respond. Finally, I wrote back, not to offer forgiveness, which felt premature, but to acknowledge that he was at least beginning to understand the magnitude of what he'd done. "Michael," I wrote, "acknowledgement is the first step toward redemption, but it's only the first step. Trust is rebuilt through consistent actions over time, not through apologies and explanations. If you're serious about changing, prove it through how you treat other elderly people in your life, not through what you say to me." As I sealed the letter, I realized that my lottery win had given me something more valuable than financial security or independence. It had given me the power to set boundaries, demand respect, and refuse to accept relationships based on manipulation or convenience. The woman who'd hidden a lottery ticket rather than share it immediately had become someone who understood that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone else's worst impulses, even when that someone is your own child. 2 years after the lottery revelation, I received a phone call that would test everything I'd learned about forgiveness, boundaries, and family relationships. Jennifer was on the other end of the line, her voice barely above a whisper. "Dorothy, I know I have no right to call you, but I need your help. It's about the boys." Connor and Blake, now 16, had been living with me full-time for the past 8 months. After Michael and Jennifer lost their house and were forced to move into a cramped apartment across town, the twins had asked if they could stay with me temporarily while finishing their sophomore year. That temporary arrangement had become permanent when it became clear that their parents' marriage was disintegrating under the weight of their financial and legal troubles. "What's wrong with Connor and Blake?" I asked, immediately concerned. "They won't speak to us, Dorothy. Blake hasn't answered our calls in 3 weeks. Connor comes to our court-mandated visits, but sits there in complete silence. Their therapist says they're processing feelings of betrayal and abandonment, but we don't know how to reach them." The irony of Jennifer asking me for help with feelings of betrayal and abandonment was almost too much to bear. But these were my grandsons we were talking about, and whatever their parents had done, the boys deserved every chance at healing. "Jennifer, have you considered that maybe they need time to work through their feelings without pressure from you? To forgive and forget? But they're only 16. They need their parents. They need parents who act like parents, I corrected. Parents who protect them instead of using them. Parents who tell them the truth instead of manipulating them into signing false statements. The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that I thought she might have hung up. Dorothy, I know we destroyed their trust in us, but I also know that you've become the most important person in their lives. If anyone can help us rebuild our relationship with them, it's you. This conversation was taking place on a Thursday evening in my kitchen, where Connor was helping me prepare dinner while Blake worked on homework at the same table where I'd once revealed my lottery win to his parents. The boys had adapted to living with me with an ease that suggested they'd found something here they'd been missing at home: stability, honesty, and unconditional love that didn't come with manipulation or hidden agendas. Jennifer, I can't. Fix your relationship with your sons. That's work you and Michael have to do yourselves. After I hung up, Connor looked at me with the mature expression that had replaced his childhood innocence over the past 2 years. That was Mom, wasn't it? I'd promised these boys that I would always tell them the truth, regardless of how complicated that truth might be. Yes, she's worried about her relationship with you and Blake. Good, Blake said without looking up from his calculus homework. Maybe if she worries enough, she'll figure out why we don't trust them anymore. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Michael stood on my doorstep for the first time since the day he'd tried to force me from my home. He looked older, thinner, and carried himself with the defeated posture of someone who'd lost everything he'd thought mattered. Mom, may I come in? I'd like to talk to my sons. Connor and Blake were at school, but I didn't tell him that immediately. Instead, I studied this man who'd once been my baby, my pride and joy, my successful attorney son. The Michael standing before me bore little resemblance to the confident manipulator who'd threatened guardianship proceedings 2 years earlier. Michael, the boys live here now because they feel safe here. This is their home, and I won't have them ambushed by visits they haven't consented to. I'm their father. Being their father is about more than biology, Michael. It's about earning their trust, respecting their boundaries, and putting their needs ahead of your own convenience. He seemed to deflate further. Mom, I've lost everything. My career, my marriage, my house, and now my sons. I know I made terrible mistakes, but I'm trying to change. I'm in therapy, I'm doing community service, I'm working at a legal aid clinic helping elderly people protect their rights. This last detail surprised me. You're working with elderly clients? Pro bono work with seniors who can't afford legal representation, helping them avoid the kind of exploitation I once participated in. His voice was thick with shame. Every day I see what I almost did to you, and I try to make amends by protecting other people's parents from sons like I used to be. For the first time since this ordeal began, I heard something in Michael's voice that sounded like genuine remorse rather than self-pity. Michael, redemption isn't about what you've lost. It's about who you're choosing to become. That afternoon, when Connor and Blake returned from school, I told them about their father's visit. Their reactions were predictably different, but equally revealing. Connor's anger was immediate and intense. He doesn't get to just show up here and expect us to pretend everything's fine. This is our home now, Grandma. You've given us stability and honesty. Why should we risk that for people who lied to us for months? Blake's response was more analytical but equally hurt. I've been reading about family systems therapy. The counselor says that forgiveness isn't the same thing as reconciliation. You can forgive someone for your own healing while still maintaining boundaries to protect yourself from future harm. These 16-year-old boys were grappling with concepts that many adults never master. They were learning to distinguish between holding grudges and protecting themselves, between compassion and enabling, between love and trust. 3 weeks later, I made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself. I invited Michael and Jennifer to Sunday dinner at my house, with Connor and Blake's knowledge and reluctant consent. The dinner was awkward beyond description. Michael and Jennifer sat at my table like strangers, uncertain of how to interact, with sons who'd grown 2 years older and immeasurably wiser during their absence from meaningful parenting. The boys were polite but distant, answering direct questions with minimal responses while avoiding eye contact. But something important happened during dessert. Jennifer, apparently unable to bear the silence any longer, broke down completely. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed, looking directly at Connor and Blake for the first time all evening. "I know sorry isn't enough, but I need you to know that using you boys to manipulate your grandmother was the worst thing I've ever done. You deserved parents who protected you from adult problems, not parents who turned you into weapons against someone you loved." Connor's composure finally cracked. "Mom, you made us lie about Grandma Dorothy. You made us sign papers saying she was crazy when we knew she wasn't. How are we supposed to trust you ever again?" "I don't know," Jennifer whispered. "I honestly don't know how to earn back trust I threw away so carelessly." Michael, who'd been silent throughout most of the dinner, finally spoke up. "Boys, I need you to understand something. What we did to your grandmother, what we put you through, that wasn't normal family behavior. That was abuse, and abuse is never the victim's fault. You were children caught in an adult power struggle, and we made you choose sides instead of protecting you from having to make that choice." Blake looked at his father with surprised respect. "Dad, that's the first time you've ever admitted that what happened was abuse." "It took me 2 years of therapy to be able to say that word out loud," Michael replied. "But your grandmother was absolutely right to fight us, and you boys were absolutely right to see through our manipulation. That dinner didn't magically repair our fractured family relationships, but it established a new foundation based on truth rather than manipulation." Over the following months, Michael and Jennifer began the slow work of rebuilding relationships with their sons, not by demanding forgiveness, but by earning it through consistent, honest behavior. Connor and Blake continued living with me, but they gradually began spending more time with their parents, testing boundaries and rebuilding trust in small increments. Family therapy sessions became a regular part of our schedule, with all of us working to understand how we'd arrived at such a devastating place and how to prevent it from happening again. The lottery money had given me the power to resist their initial manipulation, but it was the work we all did afterward. The honest conversations, the boundary setting, the slow rebuilding of trust that had created the possibility of genuine healing. Michael's work with elderly clients had evolved into a passion for elder rights advocacy. He'd joined the board of directors for the Silver Defenders and had helped us draft legislation to strengthen oversight of guardianship proceedings. His first-hand experience with the potential for abuse had made him an effective advocate for protecting other families from what he'd almost done to ours. Jennifer had found work as a victim advocate with the County Domestic Violence Program, specializing in financial abuse cases. Her understanding of how manipulation worked had given her unique insights into helping other women recognize and escape similar situations. As I watched my son and daughter-in-law slowly rebuilding their lives and relationships, I realized that the lottery win had ultimately given our family something more valuable than money. It had given us the truth. And sometimes, the truth is the only foundation solid enough to support genuine love and lasting healing. 5 years had passed since that gray October morning when Michael delivered his ultimatum about the nursing home van. Now I stood in the same kitchen where I'd once hidden a lottery ticket, but everything had changed in ways I could never have imagined. The morning light streamed through new windows that Connor had helped me select during last summer's renovation project. At 21, he'd become a computer science major with a specialty in assistive technology for elderly people. His senior thesis project was developing an app that would help families communicate about elder care decisions in ways that prioritized the elderly person's autonomy and preferences. "It's called My Voice First," he'd explained during his last visit home from college. "The idea is that before any family member can make suggestions about care, they have to go through a checklist that ensures they've actually listened to what the elderly person wants." Blake, now a junior at Ohio State studying social work with a focus on elder advocacy, had spent his winter break working with the Silver Defenders to develop educational materials for high schools. His project, How to Honor Your Elders Without Controlling Them, had been adopted by 3 school districts as part of their family studies curriculum. Both boys had grown into young men who understood the difference between caring for someone and controlling them, a distinction their parents had once failed to grasp. My Parkinson's symptoms had progressed as Dr. Williams had predicted they would, but slowly and manageably. The tremor in my left hand was more pronounced now, and I used a walker for longer distances, but I remained independent in my modified home with Maria's continued support 3 days a week. More importantly, every decision about my care remained mine to make. When I'd needed to give up driving last year, I'd researched transportation options and chosen a service that respected my autonomy rather than treating me like a child. When Dr. Williams had suggested physical therapy, I'd selected a provider who focused on maintaining independence rather than managing decline. The lottery money had been invested wisely with the help of a financial advisor I'd chosen myself, someone recommended by the Silver Defenders who specialized in helping elderly clients maintain control over their assets. The fund had grown to over $2 million, ensuring that I could maintain my independence for the rest of my life, while also leaving substantial inheritances for Connor, Blake, and even Sarah's children in Seattle. But the money had never been the real victory. The real victory was sitting at my kitchen table every Sunday morning when Michael and Jennifer joined me for coffee and honest conversation about our family's journey from manipulation to mutual respect. Michael's transformation had been the most dramatic. His work with the Legal Aid Clinic had evolved into a full-time position as director of their Elder Rights Division. He'd testified before the state legislature about guardianship reform, written articles for legal journals about preventing elder abuse, and had become a sought-after speaker at conferences on family law and elder advocacy. "You know what's strange, Mom?" he'd said during one of our recent Sunday conversations. "I help families navigate these issues every day now, and I see myself in every adult child who thinks they know what's best for their parent. The difference is that now I can recognize that impulse and redirect it toward actually listening to what the parent wants." Jennifer's journey had been quieter but equally profound. Her work with domestic violence victims had taught her to recognize the subtle signs of coercive control, the same patterns she'd once used against me. She'd completed additional training in trauma counseling and had specialized in helping women who'd experienced financial abuse within their families. "Dorothy," she told me just last month, "every client I work with teaches me something new about how abuse disguises itself as love. I see now that what we did to you wasn't love. It was control disguised as concern. Real love would have meant respecting your choices even when we disagreed with them." The most unexpected development had been my relationship with Ruth Price, the 88-year-old woman whose case had been connected to Michael's other elder abuse victims. Ruth and I had become close friends, bonding over our shared experience of family, betrayal, and recovery. Despite her advanced age, Ruth had remained in her own home and had become a fierce advocate for elderly rights. "Dorothy," she'd said during one of our weekly phone calls, "people always ask me if I've forgiven my son for what he tried to do, but I think they're asking the wrong question. The real question isn't whether I've forgiven him. It's whether I've learned to protect myself from people who see my age as an excuse to ignore my autonomy." That wisdom had become central to my own healing journey. Forgiveness, I'd learned, wasn't about absolving others of responsibility for their actions. It was about freeing myself from the burden of anger while maintaining the boundaries necessary to protect my well-being. The Silver Defenders had grown from our small support group into a regional organization with chapters in 6 states. We'd successfully lobbied for legislation requiring mandatory training for guardianship attorneys, established a hotline for elderly people experiencing family pressure, and created educational programs for families dealing with aging-related decisions. Our biggest victory had come when the state passed Dorothy's Law, legislation requiring that all guardianship petitions include documented evidence that the alleged incapacitated person had been consulted about their preferences, and that less restrictive alternatives had been explored. The law was named after me, but I'd insisted that it honor all elderly people who'd fought for their right to self-determination. Last spring, I'd been invited to speak at a national conference on elder rights. Standing at the podium, looking out at an audience of lawyers, social workers, and family advocates, I'd shared the story of my lottery win and its aftermath. The money didn't save me from my family's manipulation, I'd told the audience. The money revealed the manipulation. That was already there. What saved me was the determination to maintain my dignity and autonomy regardless of the cost. Every elderly person deserves that same opportunity to make their own choices, even when their families disagree with those choices. The speech had been recorded and had gone viral on social media, reaching hundreds of thousands of people dealing with similar family dynamics. The comments section had been filled with stories from elderly people who'd recognized their own experiences in mine, and from adult children who'd realized they'd been unconsciously manipulating their parents in the name of care. But perhaps the most meaningful response had come in a letter from a woman named Margaret Chen, whose 82-year-old father had used my story to resist his children's pressure to move to assisted living. "Mrs. Davis," she'd written, "my father showed me the video of your speech and said, 'This woman understands that being old doesn't mean being stupid.' Your story helped me realize that my father's resistance to our suggestions wasn't stubbornness, it was self-advocacy. We've started having different conversations now, conversations where we listen to what he wants instead of telling him what we think he needs." As I read that letter, I'd realized that the lottery ticket I'd hidden in my jewelry box 5 years earlier had been worth far more than $2.3 million. It had been worth the transformation of countless family relationships, the strengthening of legal protections for elderly people, and the creation of a movement that honored the dignity and autonomy of aging Americans. Connor and Blake were coming home for Thanksgiving next week, and for the first time in 5 years, Michael and Jennifer would be joining us for the entire holiday weekend. We'd be celebrating not just gratitude, but the hard-won achievement of becoming a family that could love each other without trying to control each other. The woman who'd once trembled at the thought of standing up to her son's manipulation had become someone who spoke at national conferences about elder rights. The family that had once been fractured by greed and control had been rebuilt on a foundation of mutual respect and honest communication. Sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as the worst betrayals. Sometimes losing everything you thought mattered helps you discover what actually does matter. And sometimes a lottery ticket hidden in a jewelry box becomes the key to unlocking not just financial security, but human dignity and family healing. The numbers on that ticket had been 7, 14, 23, 31, 42, and bonus number 18. But the real winning number had been the courage to demand respect, maintain boundaries, and refuse to let anyone, even family, define my worth or control my choices. That courage, I'd learned, was worth far more than any amount of money. Today marks exactly 6 years since Michael stood in my doorway and told me the nursing home van would arrive at 9 the next morning. I'm sitting in the same chair where I once hid a lottery ticket, but the woman in this chair bears little resemblance to the frightened 72-year-old who trembled at her son's ultimatum. This morning brought news that would have seemed impossible during those dark October days when my family was systematically dismantling my life. The National Association of Elder Law Attorneys has awarded me their Lifetime Achievement Award for advocacy, making me the first non-lawyer to receive this honor. The ceremony will be held next month in Washington, D.C., and Connor, Blake, Michael, and Jennifer will all be there to celebrate. But perhaps more meaningful than any award was the phone call I received yesterday from Sandra Martinez at the lottery office. "Mrs. Davis, I wanted you to know that we're featuring your story in our responsible gaming campaign. Not because of the money you won, but because of what you did with the power that money gave you. Sandra explained that lottery officials had been tracking the long-term impact of major winners, and my case had become legendary within their organization. Most people who win millions focus on what they'll buy or where they'll travel. You used your winnings to expose family manipulation and transform elder care advocacy. It's unlike anything we've ever seen. The conversation reminded me of something Connor had said during his last visit home from graduate school, where he was now pursuing a PhD in gerontechnology. Grandma Dorothy, you didn't just win the lottery. You won the lottery at exactly the moment when you most needed the power to fight back. That's not coincidence. That's destiny. Perhaps he was right. The timing had been extraordinary. Winning just days after my diagnosis, just as Michael and Jennifer were launching their campaign to control my life. Without that windfall, I might have become another statistic in the elder abuse files, another elderly person who lost their independence to adult children who confused love with control. This afternoon, I'm hosting a gathering that would have been unimaginable 6 years ago. The living room where movers once packed my belongings is now filled with people whose lives have been touched by our story. Ruth Price, now 94 and still fiercely independent, sits in Frank's old recliner sharing advice with Margaret, Chen, whose own father had inspired her to become an elder rights attorney. Dr. Williams is here, having recently retired from her practice to focus full-time on research into aging in place. Detective Morrison brought his own mother, who'd experienced family pressure to sell her home after his father's death. Maria Santos, my home health aide, has brought her daughter Isabella, who's starting medical school next fall with the goal of specializing in geriatric medicine. The Silver Defenders leadership team fills my dining room, planning our next legislative initiative. Blake, now graduated with his social work degree and working for the State Adult Protective Services Division, is leading a discussion about expanding our educational programs into nursing schools and medical training programs. The goal, he explains with the passion I remember from his teenage years, is to teach future healthcare providers that elderly patients are the primary decision-makers about their own care, not their adult children. But the most remarkable transformation sits quietly in my kitchen, where Michael is deep in conversation with Eleanor Price, Ruth's daughter, about a case he's handling. Michael's client is an 86-year-old man whose daughter has been trying to force him into memory care despite the absence of any cognitive impairment. The daughter keeps insisting she knows what's best for him, Michael explains, but she won't listen to what he actually wants. It's like watching myself 6 years ago, except now I can see the manipulation from the outside. Eleanor nods knowingly. At least now you can help him fight back before it goes as far as it did with our families. Jennifer appears in the doorway, carrying a tray of coffee for the group. Her transformation has been as profound as Michael's, though quieter. Her work with financial abuse victims has given her insights into the psychology of control that she applies to her ongoing family relationships. "Dorothy," she says, setting down the tray, "I got a call this morning from a woman in Phoenix whose son is trying to get power of attorney over her finances. She saw your conference speech online and asked if I could connect her with resources. I gave her the Silver Defenders hotline number. These calls come regularly now." My story has reached people across the country who recognize their own situations in my experience. Some are elderly people fighting family manipulation. Others are adult children who've realized they've been unconsciously controlling their parents. All of them find hope in the proof that these patterns can be changed. As the afternoon winds down and guests begin to leave, Connor pulls me aside with an envelope he's been carrying all day. "Grandma, I wanted to give you this privately." Inside is a letter from the dean of his university, officially accepting his dissertation proposal. The title makes me smile. Technology as Liberation, Designing Assistive Systems that Enhance rather than Replace Human Autonomy. It's inspired by everything you taught me about the difference between helping someone and controlling them, he explains. The technology I'm designing will support elderly people's independence instead of monitoring them like children. After everyone has gone home, I sit alone in my living room as evening shadows lengthen across the hardwood floors Frank once installed with his own hands. The house is quiet, except for the familiar creaking that speaks of decades of memories, embedded in its walls. On my coffee table lies a stack of letters from people whose lives have been changed by my story. There's the woman in Oregon whose lottery-winning neighbor helped her fight her son's guardianship petition. The man in Florida whose daughter watched my conference speech and apologized for years of financial manipulation. The social worker in Texas who restructured her entire approach to family counseling after reading about our experience. Each letter represents a victory for human dignity, a family relationship rebuilt on respect rather than control, an elderly person who maintained their autonomy despite pressure to surrender it. But perhaps the most precious item on that table is a photograph from last month's family gathering. Michael and Jennifer sit on either side of me, their arms around my shoulders in genuine affection rather than possessive control. Connor and Blake flank the group, young men who understand that loving someone means honoring their choices even when you disagree with them. We look like what we've become, a family that has survived the worst kind of betrayal and emerged stronger, more honest, and more loving than we were before. The lottery money made that transformation possible, but it didn't make it inevitable. That required something more valuable than any jackpot: the courage to demand respect and the wisdom to distinguish between love and manipulation. As I prepare for bed, I pass the jewelry box where I once hid a lottery ticket worth $2.3 million. Tonight, it holds something more valuable: letters from Connor and Blake, cards from grateful families who've found their own courage through my story, and a small notebook where I record daily reminders of what I've learned. Today's entry reads, "Real wealth isn't measured in bank accounts. It's measured in relationships built on mutual respect, boundaries maintained with love, and the courage to be authentically yourself regardless of who disagrees with your choices." Tomorrow, I'll wake up in my own home, make my own decisions about my day, and continue living a life defined by my values rather than other people's fears. The tremor in my hand may be more pronounced, my steps may be slower, but my voice remains strong, and my choices remain my own. 6 years ago, a lottery ticket gave me the power to fight for my dignity. Today, that dignity has become a legacy that will outlive any amount of money. And that, I've learned, is the only jackpot that truly matters. The woman who once hid her winnings to test her family's character has become someone who shares her story to strengthen other families' bonds. The lottery ticket that started as a secret weapon has become a testament to the power of standing up for yourself, no matter how old you are, no matter who opposes you, and no matter what it costs. Sometimes the biggest gamble isn't buying a lottery ticket. Sometimes it's betting on your own worth when everyone else has decided you're worthless. That's a bet I won, and it paid dividends no jackpot could ever match. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.